Now we have social versus automatic. So social are things, let's take some time and come up with some more examples of social versus automatic. These are the examples that I came up with. So for social, I came up with both. Next, we have unlearned versus learned. So unlearned reinforcers require no learning. Let's dive a little more into unlearned or unconditioned reinforcers. So we just talked about unlearned versus learned. Unlearned can also be referred to as unconditioned reinforcer. So this is a stimulus change that functions as reinforcement even though the learner has no particular learning history with it. So it's kind of nice to refer it to as unlearned reinforcer because it can remind us that there's no particular learning history with this reinforcer, but it is also referred to as unconditioned reinforcer. So these are things that are reinforcing at birth and a genetic part of all humans. So some examples are food, drink, sleep, warmth, oxygen. These are all things that we are born to view as reinforcing. So food is automatically reinforcing. We don't need any learning history to tell us that food is reinforcing. Same with drinking, sleeping, warmth, oxygen. These are all things that we just are born with. Again, they're just a genetic part of all humans. Now let's dive a little bit more into learned reinforcers, which are also considered conditioned reinforcers. And this is a previously neutral stimulus change that has acquired the capability to function as a reinforcer through stimulus-stimulus pairing with one or more unconditioned reinforcers or conditioned reinforcers. Lots of jargon, but this again is just reinforcers that are learned. So we talked about the unlearned reinforcers: food, sleep, warmth, oxygen. Those are all things that we don't have to learn. But learned reinforcers are things that they weren't really reinforcing initially, and then these were paired with an unconditioned reinforcer and became reinforcing. And this is often how social praise or attention is established as reinforcing. Or, for example, if you think about a baby, if you just showed them money, that's not going to be reinforcing. But through time, they learned that money is paired with things like you can buy food with it, you can buy all these cool things, you can buy your favorite treats, and that becomes a learned reinforcer over time. But initially, money to a baby is, again, neutral. It doesn't mean anything to them, but eventually it's learned. Same with social praise or attention, that is a learned behavior. So as time goes on, we learn that attention is paired with other things, like maybe social praise and attention at work is paired with, bonuses, which is paired with more money, which is paired with, being able to buy the things that you need, like food, things like that. So you can kind of see that learned reinforcers are just things that we learn over time through our life. Now we have generalized conditioned reinforcer, and this is a conditioned reinforcer that, as a result of having been paired with many unconditioned and conditioned reinforcers, does not depend on a current EO for any particular form of reinforcement for its effectiveness. Lots of jargon again, but we can break it down. So this can be example, I've already mentioned money. Money at any time is reinforcing because it has been paired with many unconditioned and conditioned reinforcers. You can buy food with money, you can buy the ability to do different activities like golfing with money, and so it doesn't depend on a current EO for any particular form of reinforcement for it to be effective, because it unlocks so many different reinforcers so that anytime you can ask someone if they want money, it's going to likely be reinforcing. The same thing is for a token. Again, in a token board situation in the classroom, it can be paired with so many different reinforcers that it doesn't depend on the current EO for any particular form of reinforcement. So because, again, it's been paired with so much. Again, token is really like money. And same with social attention. Social attention can be paired with all sorts of different reinforcers. And these are really helpful because we can just use these like money, like a token, without having to think about the motivation of it, because it's always going to be motivating. Again, it talks about how it doesn't have to depend on a current establishing operation, because it's always motivating, likely because it's been paired with so much reinforcement, and it's been paired with a variety of unconditioned and conditioned reinforcers that it will likely always be reinforcing. Let's take a little time for a review. So which of the following is an example of an unlearned reinforcer? So we have A, money; B, praise; C, food; and D, tokens. So take some time and then we'll review the answer. The answer is C, food. So which of the following is an example of an unlearned reinforcer? Like we talked about, unlearned is we're born with it. those things are reinforcing at birth, food is reinforcing. And A for money, that's going to be a learned reinforcer, specifically a generalized condition reinforcer, just like tokens, and as well as praise. So food is going to be that thing that's unlearned. We don't need any learning history to know that food is reinforcing, just like oxygen, just like warmth. As I've mentioned several times in this workshop, reinforcement is so individual. And it is very important to remember that reinforcement is individual. Like we talked about the myths, praise is not just a reinforcer for everyone, and we really have to understand the individual to understand what's reinforcing to them and understand what is going to increase their behavior. And reinforcement can increase via two different paths. So we have positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, and we'll talk a little bit more about each of these. Positive reinforcement is a response is followed by a presentation of examples is a behavior you're going to hold your cup under. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, is a response produces we have the behavior of hitting a snooze button. When you hit that snooze button, nothing is. There are two types of negative reinforcement. So we have escape contingency and an avoidance contingency. An escape contingency is a response terminates an ongoing stimulus, whereas an avoidance contingency, a response prevents or postpones the presentation of a stimulus. So again, escape is going to terminate an ongoing stimulus, whereas avoidance is going to prevent or postpone the presentation of a stimulus. So for escape, an example could be turning off an alarm. So we have that ongoing stimulus, so as your alarm is blaring, and then we're going to engage in the response that terminates that ongoing stimulus. So we're going to turn off, we're going to hit that button, and it's going to terminate that alarm going off. So it's going to, again, terminate that ongoing stimulus. Then an example for avoidance contingency is turning around to avoid small talk with someone you saw. So maybe you're walking in the store, you see someone down the aisle, you're really tired, you just want to get home, and so you're going to turn around to avoid that small talk with someone and get home sooner. So we're going to turn around to avoid that. Again, that's going to prevent, in this case, it will prevent or postpone, but in this case, it's going to prevent likely that you have to talk with them. So you're going to prevent that stimulus or that engaging with that small talk with that person from happening. Negative reinforcement is something that adults often respond to, and it's important to remember that this is a contingency that you yourself and your behaviors can be responding to. So common negative reinforcement contingencies that influence parents and teachers' behaviors are consoling a baby so they stop crying. So again, that consoling a baby is going to postpone or terminate the baby crying. So we're engaging in that behavior, and it's going to postpone that stimulus that's been ongoing for us. And so that's going to increase our behavior in the future of consoling the baby. Another example is letting a student play on the computer so they stop yelling during class. This is going to be negative reinforcement for us. So they're yelling in class, they're engaging in that ongoing stimulus, and we're going to engage in the behavior of letting them play on the computers so that stimulus just is postponed, and then that's going to increase our behavior in the future of letting them play again because it's postponing this stimulus. So again, it's just important to think about how not only are students responding to different contingencies in their environment, but we also are. And a lot of times it can be a negative reinforcement contingency where we're engaging in a behavior to terminate or postpone or prevent a stimulus from happening or stop it from occurring. Time for another review question. Which is an example of negative reinforcement? Assume the following behaviors all increase in the future. So A, giving a student slime time for doing their test. B, giving the class a pizza party for following group instructions. C, letting a student skip the homework after they helped a friend. Or D, high-fiving a student after they helped pick up trash. So again, which of these examples is an example of negative reinforcement? Well, you take some time to think about this, and you can pause it if you need more time. If you guess C, you are correct. Letting a student skip the homework after they helped a friend. So the homework in this case is that stimulus, and by letting them skip it, they get to postpone, terminate that stimulus because they helped a friend, and this will increase their behavior of helping a friend in the future because they got to get out of this homework. And this is an example of negative reinforcement because, again, that stimulus is terminating, postponing, preventing that stimulus from happening. The other examples, giving a student slime time after they do their test, giving the class a pizza party for following group instructions, high-fiving a student after they picked up trash, those would all be examples of positive reinforcement because something is being added to the environment, a stimulus is being presented in the environment that is going to increase the future occurrence of those behaviors. Now we will talk about reinforcement schedules. So reinforcement schedules, there are two types. There is contingent reinforcement schedules and non-contingent reinforcement schedules. Contingent schedules they require the occurrence of a target behavior. So say your target behavior is cleaning up the classroom, it's going to require that behavior to occur before reinforcement is delivered. Non-contingent is reinforcement is delivered independent of the target behavior. So again, if in this situation where maybe it's cleaning up the classroom does not have to occur for reinforcement to be delivered. So we have contingent, so it's contingent on that target behavior, and then we have non-contingent, so it's not contingent on that target behavior. Non-contingent reinforcement is a function-based intervention in which the behavior analyst schedules delivery of the functional reinforcer on a time-based response-independent schedule. So maybe an example is a student really is reinforced by attention, and recently they've been yelling out a lot to get attention from the teachers. So maybe an intervention for this would be a non-contingent reinforcement intervention where attention is just delivered on a time-based response independent schedule. So nothing has to happen for it to be delivered, and it's just on a time-based. So maybe every 30 seconds, the teacher is giving that connection or that attention to the student. So maybe it's like, hey, I really like your shirt, or just different things like that, so that that student is receiving the attention that they're seeking, the attention and connection that they're seeking. Non-contingent reinforcement can be delivered on a fixed time schedule, so maybe it's every minute, or a variable time schedule. So maybe on average it's every minute, but sometimes it's 30 seconds, sometimes it's 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 10 seconds. So on average of time, but it's going to be a varied time or a variable time schedule that reinforcement is going to be delivered on. Then we have continuous reinforcement, and this is reinforcers are after every single instance of the skill or behavior. So we'll talk about fixed ratio. A continuous reinforcement schedule is a fixed ratio of 1. And these are great for teaching new skills or behaviors because we're going to need that high ratio of reinforcement to behavior. So we're going to need that 1-to-1, right? So maybe we're teaching a kid how to tie their shoe for the first time. We want reinforcement every single time after they engage in that behavior because it's a new skill and we're really wanting to teach that skill. And again, it's really great for teaching those new skills or behaviors, and it's going to be after every single instance of the skill or behavior. Then we have schedules of intermittent reinforcement, and this is going to be, again, a contingent reinforcement schedule, and within schedules of intermittent reinforcement, we have fixed, variable, ratio, and interval. Now we'll talk about fixed schedules. So fixed schedules of reinforcement occur after set, consistent times or number of responses. So fixed schedules can be better for introducing a new skill or behavior. Again, like we talked about, a fixed schedule of 1, a fixed ratio schedule of 1 specifically is continuous reinforcement, and that is great for introducing a new skill or behavior. But fixed schedules in general occur after a set consistent time or a set consistent number of responses. So for example, maybe it's reinforcement is delivered after every 2 problems, after every sight word read, after every 5 minutes of reading, after every 30 seconds of cleaning. So those are some examples of fixed schedules of reinforcement. Variable schedules, on the other hand, variable schedules of reinforcement occur on an average of responses or time intervals. So they are better for maintaining a learned skill or behavior over time. So we're going to use the fixed schedules for when we're introducing a skill or behavior, and then we'll use variable schedules to maintain a learned skill or behavior over time. So this is going to be about every 2 problems. So maybe sometimes it's reinforced 1 problem, after 1 problem, sometimes after 3, sometimes after 2. So we're going to do an average of every 2 problems. So that's a variable schedule. Or maybe we'll deliver reinforcement every sight word or so. So maybe it's after 2 sight words, maybe it's after 1, maybe sometimes it's after 3. But again, it's going to be an average of every sight word. Another example is on average of 5 minutes. So maybe we're delivering reinforcement on an average of 5 minutes for reading a book. And so maybe it's after 1 minute sometimes, maybe it's after 7 minutes sometimes, maybe it's after 2 minutes, maybe it's after 6 minutes, but it's going to average out to about every 5 minutes. But again, it's a variable. Lastly, another example is on an average of 30 seconds. So maybe we're delivering reinforcement for cleaning up the classroom after every 30 seconds, but it's going to be an average. So maybe it's after a minute, maybe it's after 15 seconds, maybe it's after 10 seconds, maybe it's after 45, but it's going to average out to about 30 seconds. And again, these are variable schedules because the time or after the number of responses is varying. Ratio schedules deliver reinforcement after a number of responses occur. So we're going to focus on that. It's the number of responses, or the ratio schedules. So completing 5 math problems, then reinforcement is delivered. Reading 1 book, saying 10 sight words, will have those number of responses occur before reinforcement is delivered. Interval schedules, we're going to focus on the lapse of time that someone is engaging in the behavior for reinforcement. So maybe reading for 20 minutes, playing with peers for 2 minutes, writing for 1 minute, or attending to the teacher for 5 minutes. So again, it's that lapse of time is required before reinforcement is delivered. Now we'll start to combine all of these different types of schedules to create even more schedules. So a fixed ratio schedule is when we provide reinforcement after a student engages in a response a set number of times. So for example, Jane gets slime every time after she reads 3 pages of her book. So that is going to be on a fixed ratio schedule of 3. And for example, this is like a notation example that's often used. You can write FR3. So she's going to get slime every time after she reads 3 pages of her book. So she'll read 3 pages, get slime. Read 3 pages, get slime. And again, it's fixed, so it's going to be consistent. So after every single time she reads 3 pages, she's going to get that slime. We will talk about the effects of each schedule as we define them. So the effects of a fixed ratio schedule is we're going to see a post-reinforcement pause. So that is no responding for a period of time after reinforcement. We also will see higher rates of responding with higher rates of reinforcement, which kind of makes sense. And then we also want to make sure that we acknowledge that the rate of response decreases if requirements are too much. So if the requirement is reading 50 sight words, that might be too much, and we might see the rate of responding decrease. So we want to make sure the response requirements are appropriate and individualized. Next, we'll talk about variable ratio schedule, and this is when we provide reinforcement after a variable number of responses. So Jane gets slime every time she reads on average 3 pages of her book. So sometimes she'll get reinforcement after reading 1 page. Reinforcement is delivered for that behavior, sometimes maybe after 4 pages, but on average it's going to be after 3 pages of reading her book. And this notation is going to be VR3, so a variable ratio of 3. The effects of variable ratio schedules include there's oftentimes a consistent steady rates of responding because it is a variable schedule, and then we usually get, because there's no reinforcement pause because it is varied, and then we also get typically a quick rate of response. Again, this really depends on the ratio of your reinforcement, and it's just something to really think about. It's going to really depend on the individual. You really have to make sure that the response is appropriate, the response requirements are appropriate, and then kind of decide your ratio based on that. Now we have fixed interval schedule. So fixed interval schedules deliver reinforcement after a set amount of time a student engages in a skill or behavior. So Jane gets slime time every time she reads for 5 minutes. So again, we have that interval aspect, she's reading for 5 minutes, and we have that fixed aspect, so it's consistent. So she consistently gets slime after she reads for 5 minutes. The notation example for this is FI 5 minutes. So we can write this quickhand by saying FI fixed interval 5 minutes. So we know that for this behavior, she's going to get reinforcement is going to be delivered after every 5 minutes of her reading the book. The effects of fixed interval schedules include there's typically a post-reinforcement pause occurring at the beginning of the interval with rate of responding increasing towards the end of the interval. So oftentimes we get the post-reinforcement pause with these fixed schedules. Then we usually have a slow to moderate rate of responding, and the duration of the interval, like in all of the schedule, affects the responding rate. So if we have a response requirement and they have to engage in the behavior for 3 hours, that's going to affect their responding rates and may potentially decrease those responding rates because the response requirement is too much. And again, this is super individualized, and you'll have to know the abilities of your learners and what's appropriate for them. Now we have variable interval schedule. A variable interval schedule delivers reinforcement after a variable amount of time a student engages in a response. And these intervals of time are going to be random and, again, variable. So Jane gets slime on average every 20 minutes that she reads. So maybe sometimes she reads for 15 minutes and reinforcement is delivered. Maybe sometimes it's after 25 minutes, but on average it's going to be after 20 minutes. The notation for this is going to be VI 20 minutes, again, variable interval, on average around 20 minutes. Here are some of the effects of variable interval schedules. So we usually have a constant, stable rate of responding, typically few post-reinforcement pauses. Again, when we're using variable schedules, we're likely not going to see as many post-reinforcement pauses compared to fixed schedules. And then typically low to moderate rates of responding, and then the duration of intervals affects the rate of responding. Again, we really have to make sure that we're thinking about the response requirements for all of these schedules. Now we have schedule thinning, and the typical end goal for any reinforcement intervention, anytime we're using a reinforcement schedule, is that the end goal is that the behavior is maintained by a natural ratio of reinforcement. And so we're gonna have to use schedule thinning, which is slowly and incrementally thin a schedule of reinforcement by increasing the response ratio until we get to that natural ratio of reinforcement. Because if we can get to that point, then the natural environment is going to maintain that behavior and we're not having to add anything on. So again, oftentimes we talk about in applied behavior analysis, our job is to lose our jobs. So we might be intervening, but our end goal is that the student is excelling, is engaging in these behaviors without us. So again, that natural environment is going to be maintaining that behavior. And then we want to really monitor responding as schedule is thinned, because it can tell us if we're thinning too fast, and we might need to scale back, things like that. So in this example, maybe we start with a fixed ratio of 1. So the reinforcement is being delivered after every single response. Maybe we increase to 2, 3, 4, 5 until we get to that natural ratio of reinforcement. And again, we're really wanting to make sure that we're monitoring the rate of responding so that we're not moving or thinning the schedule too quickly. So think of the following example. You have a personal trainer who is helping you with your exercise goals. The personal trainer tells you that every day you work out, you can reinforce yourself and this behavior by getting a smoothie voucher to your favorite smoothie place. You are super stoked and you work out every day for an entire week. The next week, the personal trainer says you're doing great and changes the reinforcement schedule by saying you can get a smoothie voucher only after an entire month of working out every day. How would you respond? Are you going to keep exercising? So think about this for a second. Based on the previous example, here are some of the things that might happen that maybe you thought of, but here's what I thought of. So this is going to be things that are resulting from a sudden increase in ratio, and that ratio is so large that responding doesn't maintain. So before you were getting a smoothie voucher every day, and now all of a sudden it's increasing to every month after you work out for every day. So this sudden increase in ratio is likely going to lead to some things. So it can lead to avoidance. So maybe you end your subscription to the gym and you're never going back and you're just done. Or maybe it can also lead to aggression. So maybe you really get mad, you pretend to cuss out your personal trainer in your room, or you write a bad review. And it can also lead to unpredictable pauses in responding. So maybe you just stop exercising completely. This jump in this reinforcement schedule was so large that you're just done. You're just not going to do it anymore. Quick review time. The teacher provides reinforcement sometimes after 3 responses, sometimes after 5 responses, and sometimes after 4 responses. What type of reinforcement schedule is this an example of? We have A, fixed ratio, B, variable ratio, C, fixed interval, D, variable interval. So again, the teacher is providing reinforcement sometimes after 3 responses, sometimes after 5, and sometimes after 4. So you can take some time to think about this, and if you need to, you can pause the video and cut back. If you guessed B, you are correct. So again, the teacher is providing reinforcement reinforcement after responses. So we know it's a ratio schedule. And then we also know that it's varying. So it's 3, sometimes after 3, sometimes after 5, sometimes after 4. So we know it's a variable ratio. A fixed ratio is going to be, it's going to be the same number of responses every time. A fixed interval, we're going to have that time aspect. So instead of number of responses, it's going to be time. So maybe a fixed interval could be after every 3 minutes, and then variable interval will have that time component, but it's going to be variable. So maybe after 3 minutes, sometimes after 4, sometimes after 2. Now we have a 5-minute activity. So identify a reinforcement strategy that you use in your classroom currently. Write down what the strategy could look like for each reinforcement schedule that we talked about. So we have variable ratio, we have fixed ratio, we have variable interval, and we have fixed interval. So think of a strategy that you're using in your classroom right now and write down what that would look like for each different type of schedule. And if you can't think of one, you can create one. Identifying a student's reinforcers. So we can use preference assessments to identify. A preference assessment are various procedures used to identify. So types of preference assessments, we have ask, then free operant. So again, I kind of talked about the ask types of preference assessment. So talk to the caregiver. Then we have free operant. So we're going to set out a bunch of different toys and activities and notice what the child. So an example could be maybe you have slime out, you have Play-Doh out, you have magnets. For child-based preference assessments, we have 3 types. So we have single stimuli, paired stimuli.